Right, good morning, everyone. We have a few microphones that are unmuted. If you could please mute yourselves so that we can get started. We can't really get started until everybody's on mute. So I hear some people driving. I can hear some clicking going on from turning signals. I hear some background noise. So we'd really appreciate if you could just take a look at your window at the bottom of where your name appears and see if you can mute yourself. That would be helpful. And I apologize, I don't know this platform as well as I know Zoom and lots of the others. So obviously those are the ones that I could probably give better guidance to, but I can't since I don't know them. Know this one rather. We thank you everybody for muting yourselves. We'll do our best to continue on as people are coming in. We are going to take a minute to introduce ourselves, but I appreciate you doing that. So my name is Leslie Davila, and I am one of your presenters today, co-presenting with Judy Cruz Ransom, who you'll see on your screen as well. We're going to go in and talk a little bit about victims and trauma and kind of our experiences of teaching and the reality of what it looks like teaching students today and the traumatic experiences that they've experienced. So I'm grateful to all of you for your interest in wanting to hear about the impact of trauma and how it enters our classrooms. I want to welcome all of you to this session, and I'm glad that you could be here today. And so I'll just introduce myself for a second, and then I'll kick it over to Judy to introduce herself. So as I mentioned, my name is Leslie Davila, and I am an adjunct faculty member at the Community College of Philadelphia, and I've been there since 2009. I teach both criminal justice and sociology courses. So as an adjunct, I have another job and a couple other things that I do. And so I actually serve in my full-time capacity as the director for the Office for Child and Youth Protection at the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. And I oversee all of the services for survivors of sexual abuse, as well as all of our child abuse prevention initiatives for the 5-county area, which includes Bucks County, Philadelphia, Montgomery County, Delaware, and Chester. And so I've actually worked with survivors and worked with trauma survivors and in the trauma field for over 25 years. 12 of those years I served as a victim advocate and assistant director in the district attorney's office of victim services, working in both our adult and juvenile division. So that's a little bit about my background. I did want to just make mention of what you see also on your screen are some QR codes. So we're going to be using QR codes in our presentation today that give you the ability to use your camera. I'm sure you figured it out over the last 2 years, how to use QR codes. And it'll give you a link to these specific ones, or link you to our LinkedIn pages if you want to connect with us or see more information about us or the work that we're doing. And you'll see some others throughout the presentation and resources. So I'll turn it over to Judy to introduce herself right now.
I am Judy Cruz Ransom, and I am an assistant professor at Community College. A lot of my career mirrors Leslie's, so I teach criminal justice and sociology. I also have been at the college since 2009, started as adjunct, and now am assistant professor full-time. I worked with those that have been impacted by trauma for over 30 years. Within those 30 years, I also worked at the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office. I worked in juvenile probation, and I had the opportunity to work with Leslie as her assistant director at the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. All of those have been within victim services. So I have also, worked with those that have been impacted by trauma over the years. I am also a current doctoral student. So my concentration is higher education, integrative studies. So I currently am a student as well. So thank you all for coming today. And we are honored to share this space with you today.
And so as you can see, Judy and I work together and been friends and colleagues for a long time, so you'll see some of that dynamic in our presentation. The few quick strategic disclosures that we want to share with you, these overlap with both of us, again, as we've been colleagues and friends for a long time, and we just want you to come into this space understanding a couple things. And one thing I wanted to mention, just again, this session auto-recorded, so we don't have an ability to turn that off. I don't usually like doing that in these type of trauma-informed spaces of recording a training, just to allow safe disclosures or conversation. So I just wanted everybody to be aware that, unfortunately, the session, can't control it, auto-recorded. So just be aware of that. Again, I ask that if you can mute yourselves, I'm still hearing some background information, some background noises, if you can just mute yourselves, that would be appreciated. And as far as some additional strategic disclosures, As you come into this space with us as your presenters, we both identify as Latinas. We both identify as trauma survivors. We have training and experience as advocates for children and families and for victims of crime. We're crisis responders. We've walked the walk with survivors of trauma. We've walked that walk with our students. We spend a lot of time not just learning about trauma, but really applying it to our everyday work in life. So what we're sharing with you is our experience, our learning, our real life, interactions and how trauma has been impacting us and our students, the research that we've lived with in our field, and also, again, our experiences in our classrooms. So we just wanted you to kind of know that's where we're coming from.
Today, we will be discussing the prevalence and experiences of trauma in society, but also as it relates to our youth and our student population. We will talk about the types of trauma experiences and what it takes to create a trauma-informed environment. We will discuss self-compassion, as we are aware that doing this work can be difficult. Lastly, we will go over resources that can be found right here at Bucks County Community College, as well as within the local community that you can have for yourself and or for your students. I want to go over a few things before we get started. We are going to use the chat feature, as Leslie said, for discussion and questions today. So feel free to type in questions in as we go along, and we will look at it and provide feedback. We'll also allow time at the end for questions. Just to make a quick disclaimer, we enter this space recognizing that trauma is prevalent in our society, and sometimes this subject matter can be difficult. Today's presentation may cue up some reactions for you, so please make sure that you're taking care of yourself, right? Only you know what that means for you. So whatever it is, we encourage that you do that, right? If you need to turn your camera off, if you need to walk away for a minute, whatever you need to do, please take care of yourself throughout this presentation, right? So we're starting out with just giving a definition of what trauma is. For purposes of this presentation, we're referring to something that is sudden, unexpected, perceived as dangerous, a threat of physical harm or actual physical harm, something that causes intense fear and feelings of helplessness. It overwhelms our immediate ability to cope, right? When we do not have enough resources to cope with a threat, it's experienced as a blow to our psyche. It's too much and it overwhelms our normal methods of coping, right? Event doesn't determine trauma. How you perceive it is how your nervous system reacts. Trauma is in the perception, not in the event, because two people perceive trauma in different ways, right? So two people might be a passenger in a very serious car crash. While both people may experience the car crash as scary and overwhelming, one person may have a different perspective and some resiliency, internal and external, that begin to kick in and allows them to recover in a matter of hours or days, while the other person may have been so deeply affected that they become unable to ride in a car for weeks, months, years, or ever. So trauma experienced as a child has an impact that can last for the rest of an individual's lifetime. It's important to know this because it will better help us understand how to best support those who have had traumatic experiences, right? Thinking about our classrooms, thinking about our students and ourselves, we all come with this trauma narrative, so we don't know when we're covering materials what's going to cue that up for someone, right? So it's important to be able to build supportive communities that help those who have been harmed, and that's our goal today, to help you to create those brave and safe spaces for students, right? So I'll start by asking a question to get us all involved. Whether you are a student, a teacher, staff, or just a visitor here today, what type of victimization or trauma has been disclosed to you or is part of your lived trauma narrative or trauma experience?
Chat to us. What has ever been disclosed to you in a classroom? What's ever come up? Or even just for us, I have that experience just even in the supermarket. What have you ever heard? What have you experienced?
Okay. Physical abuse? Students have disclosed sexual violence and domestic violence, yes? Homelessness, yes? Yeah. So you're picking up a lot of the ones that are, are unfortunately very common. Death of a loved one, yeah. Sexual and physical abuse, okay. I'll allow you to continue sharing. Um, Psychological trauma because students have ties to Ukraine, absolutely. Yeah. And a lot of us feel that pain, right? Just by watching the news, we're impacted by all of that, by the pandemic, by the war in Ukraine, by the violence and shootings, right? In our classes, Leslie and I do a lot of group discussion. We're both teaching courses that deal with human experiences. As you can imagine, teaching a criminal justice course in the city of Philadelphia gives us stuff to talk about, both from lived experiences and just watching the news or what's trending on social media. This list that you've compiled, as well as the one that you see on the screen, contains just some of the trauma examples that we have had students talk about in class. Our students have disclosed to being both victims and witnesses of violence. There's not one semester in which I don't receive multiple students talking about how crime has impacted their lives. During one of my students shared that they witnessed an argument on the street in which one of the individuals went into the house and came back with a gun and walked right up to the person he was arguing with and shot him in the middle of the day. Many more have shared experiences about childhood abuse, domestic violence, and homelessness, right? And it's, again, inclusive of what you shared in the chat. So it's something that is prevalent for us as a society and for our students. 70% of adults in the U.S. have experienced some type of traumatic event at least one time in their lives. That's 223.4 million people. In public behavioral health, over 90% of clients have experienced trauma. More than 33% of youth exposed to community violence will experience post-traumatic stress disorder, a very severe reaction to traumatic events. In the U.S., a woman is beaten every 15 seconds. A forcible rape occurs every 6 minutes. More than 5 million U.S. children experience extreme traumatic events per year, such as trauma can stem from child abuse, neglect, physical, emotional, sexual abuse, accidents or natural disasters. Grief and loss is what we've talked about today as well. War or other forms of violence, witnessing acts of violence, and cultural, historic, intergenerational trauma that we pass down throughout our families. By the age of 18, there's 1 in 4 chance that a child will have been impacted directly by interpersonal or community violence.
So just some statistics to look at really quickly. Every year, the Department of Human Services releases a report that outlines the abuse, including physical, sexual, mental abuse, and neglect, reports that come in. And this is just a snapshot. The most recent report that's been released is the 2020 statistics. The 21 has not come out yet. But there were 4,349 reports, substantiated reports of all the reports that came in. And I always like to focus on that number. And I know this is a little blurry to look at, but I always like to focus on that number because that's the number that's substantiated, not the number of the reports that come in, because sometimes there's just not enough puzzle pieces to put together. It doesn't mean that the report wasn't a valid report. But 4,349 in the state of Pennsylvania. We've seen an increase of 1.8 per thousand children from 2017 to 1.9 per thousand children in 2018, and that number continues to go up. It's gone up in 2020. We saw a significant amount of abuse and violence that was even going underreported because the mandated reporters in the system, like us teachers who are seeing things like that and making those reports known, making that information known, weren't out there. But sexual abuse remains to be the leading cause of abuse, followed by physical abuse. Parents continue to be the persons that are most responsible for abusing their children. In 2020 report, there were 47 fatalities of children and 89 near fatalities. So when we look at that report, there, even thinking about looking at these numbers, why are we talking about these numbers of child abuse of 2020, right? Think about if we're looking at the numbers of children between the ages of 5 and 9, 1,288. The 1,293 substantiated reports involving those that are 10 to 14. The average age of a college student is how old? It's 20 years old. So in 10 years, if we're still around teaching, we're going to be teaching these kids who are experiencing this abuse. That coming into our classrooms with this abuse and this is just abuse. We're not talking about racial trauma. We're not talking in these statistics. We're not talking about all the other things that you identified, homelessness and experiencing living through a world where we're seeing the war and people who are impacted by family members who are experiencing the war in Ukraine. In 2020, there were 2,029 reports of repeat abuse investigations. So not just one, but multiple times that reports were made of abuse against a child by probably a family member or someone else. And many of those having been substantiated, 287. That's 287 children or reports that came in that they've received, that they've been victims of multiple abuse. Those more allegations of re-abuse were received for the children in the age of 10 to 14. Again, think about in a few years, these are the children we're going to be seeing in our classrooms. And this number, although it's continued to increase over the years, it wasn't zero 10 years ago. So the kids that are in the youth that are in our classrooms, the teens, the students that are in our classrooms, and even the adults who are, 30 and 40, if you have those students in your classrooms now as well, they have, a similar experience. Abuse does not discriminate by age, by race, by gender, by socioeconomic status. These categories can impact incidences of abuses and interventions and resources, but trauma experiences are universal. They impact everyone. You probably have heard about this, the adverse childhood experiences, so hopefully you have some context about this. So I'm just going to go over this really quickly. It was actually a study that was done in 1998, and many people don't realize that it actually started as an obesity study to see what women who were on this scale of obesity, who were looking to try to lose weight, had in common. And what they were finding was a trauma background for a majority of the women who were in that study. And that led to the study of what we call ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and these 10 questions that were eventually developed that were asking individuals and still ask about experiences of violence, abuse, or neglect, witnessing violence in the home or community, having a family member who attempted or died by suicide, substance use problems, mental health problems, instability and parental separation, due to parental separation rather, or household members that are in jail. Those are the questions that are being asked. And what was noted basically is that these ACEs, the more the occurrences of these ACEs happened in a child's life when they were young, it was a main determinant of their health and social well-being. So not just mental, it was a clear or a pipeline to an earlier death. Having more of these, multiple of these can impact even leading to an earlier death. What many people don't know is that there was a follow-up to the ACEs study called the Philadelphia ACE Project. And they took the original 10 and added additional questions into the survey. And I'm sure all of you will now resonate with the questions of why or what they actually added into the questions. Experiences of discrimination or racism, experiences of bullying, experiences of living in foster care, so a child who is in foster care and witnessing violence, all of those, and living in an unsafe neighborhood, all of those are now looked at, as the Philadelphia ACE Project looks at, as additional ACEs, additional traumatic experiences that children experience and that can impact their well-being, their health, and that abuse and violence, it really is a public health crisis.
So in line with just looking at crime, we wanted to take a few seconds to just look at the past few years. They've continued to be violent years. This year's on trend to continue with these figures. While we continue to see various theories, there is no doubt that the pandemic has impacted crime rates, as well as the reporting of crime. So early intervention, providing resources can help lessen that trauma impact, right? So that's just Philadelphia 2020, 2021. If you wanted to look, for current statistics, you could look at the uniform crime reports. So that's Philadelphia. We'll take a look now at Bucks County. These are the reported crimes in Bucks County for 2022 to date and 2021. Although we usually focus on violent crimes in these discussions, I want to remind everyone that non-violent crimes can also have an impact and cause trauma. Again, we started with that car accident scenario, right? So if we look at trauma as an event that overwhelms our coping skills and internal and external resources, this can help even in these types of cases. So think about going home tonight again and finding out that someone had broken into your home and gone through your belongings. How would that make you feel? That can make you feel violated and could be a traumatic experience depending on whatever your trauma narrative is and whatever your coping skills are, right? So we think about that person that is on the side of the road and they have a flat tire, right? To some of us, we just call AAA. To someone else, that might be the last thing that they can deal within their trauma narrative and can cause them to break down, right? So that is just looking at some of those statistics.
So, look, what does it mean to be trauma informed? So we talked about what trauma was, and we're doing this very quickly because this is a very quick workshop, by the way. What is trauma, right? We talked about that. What are traumatic experiences? Knowing all of that is helpful to creating a trauma-informed environment. And trauma-informed approach basically, means that we need to be educated. We need to understand how trauma and traumatic experiences impact individuals. And we should actively work to restore those major areas of loss through our interactions. Trauma means that there's a loss that's experienced. There's loss of power, loss of control, loss of safety, loss of trust. Not all loss may be traumatic, but there's loss related in a traumatic experience. So trying to restore that, trying to be mindful of how to structure our interactions with trauma survivors. It means that we got to realize that trauma survivors, again, have lost that power and control. It's been stripped away. So as faculty, how can we help provide a sense of safe environment and opportunities to experience an empowerment opportunity, voice, and choice in our syllabus, in our structure of our classrooms, in our dialogue? And we'll talk a little bit about this more in a second, but think about that. Start thinking about where can you give students voice? Where can you give them an opportunity to really utilize their resilience and empower them by highlighting their strengths? We are all inherently resilient in some way. So how can you help to restore their power after an experience of feeling powerlessness? How can you encourage them? We should be aware of the signs and symptoms of trauma. That's part of being trauma informed, so that when we see them, we can help even educate students on what they may be experiencing. And even in a general way, not directly, this is what you're going through, but even talking about it's okay to be upset after watching the weekend's news of violence as you're walking into this learning space, acknowledging that. Experiencing trauma leaves individuals in a vulnerable state. And we have to be careful about, putting students in positions of feeling further loss of control and further loss of their safety as much as possible. So being trauma informed really is a mindset that we as educators have to approach with our students. Research really indicates that there's strong, stable, nurturing relationships foster a feeling of belonging. And this feeling of belonging is really important for students. And it's absolutely imperative for healing with students who've experienced trauma. And you, as an educator in the classroom or virtually, may be that one stable, strong adult in their lives in that moment. We can all think back, hopefully, to an adult who was there for us at one point. A friend now, a peer who is there for us now. Relationships can be very healing post-traumatic experiences. Trauma is pervasive. The impact of trauma is far-reaching. Trauma affects how people approach the education that we're trying to give them. Our students are coming into that experience, and it is the lens by which they're viewing the engagement. As we've said, we teach criminal justice and sociology, and it really impacts people's lives, that type of experience. So that's the lens by which they're entering our space. If they've had negative experiences with law enforcement, if they've had negative experiences with education or other educators, they may be bringing that into your space. Recovery, though, and healing are possible. So I don't want everybody to walk off this space and think, okay, trauma bad only, and that's it. That's the end of it. No, there is healing that's possible. There's protective factors that help to facilitate healing and resilience, and we're part of that as educators. And healing can take place, again, within the context of those relationships. And so just really quickly, one of the things to be mindful, we all have a crisis reaction. We all experience trauma and stress in this physical reaction. And if you've ever heard of fight, flight, freeze, some individuals in the moment of a start, right? So you're at a event and you hear something that sounds like gunshots. There's going to be people who run away. There's going to be people who freeze. and there's going to be people who go running towards to see if they can stop or help. That is hardwired into our brains. We don't have control over that. Our bodies are basically reacting in the way that we need to protect ourselves. In a stressful environment, we have those same interactions and those same reactions. So think about how this looks like in your classroom. In your classroom, you may have students who are experiencing either stressors at home or even stressors being in a classroom because they have to take a test, or because they have to be part of a group discussion, or because they don't have their homework assignment completed. Whatever it is, they may be having those stress reactions. And this is what they look like. So for someone who is a fighter, they might talk back. They might be aggressive. You might see them and think they're being hyperactive and can't stay still in their seats. That might be their fight. That might be their crisis traumatic experience stressor reaction. For individuals who are fleers, the ones that want to run away, they might be the ones who don't want to be around anybody. They might be avoiding you. If you're teaching online, these might be the ones who don't respond. They don't respond to your emails and your outreach. They don't respond to you saying, please, I really want to help you pass this course. They might not hand in their paper and their assignments because they just can't, they're avoiding, they're running away from the stressful situation. And those freezers are the ones, that you might even see this as overcompliance. A student, a friend, all of what we're sharing with you today is not just classroom experience. It could be, applied anywhere. But it might be that individual who, says yes to everyone because they can't, that's their stressor, as opposed to saying no. No is too confrontational. So these are just a few quick ways to think about the reactions that your students and the interactions that you may be having with your students in class, in email, on phone, in Zoom, in a virtual classroom setting may be an indicator of something else. And so it may not just be that they're aggressive. It might be because they're experiencing their stress reaction through aggression.
So I see the comments, and we're going to go over some best practices now. So if you still have that question, we will answer it towards the end, but I do see it, right? So some best practices in trauma-informed teaching approaches are just an awareness that the trauma exists, right? Knowing that, the elephant in the room, trying to predict and prepare students for subjects and materials that'll be coming up, right? A quick disclaimer for a video that you're going to show, ownership of text that that might have biases or cue up some emotions, right? Expect the unexpected responses. Leslie talked about all of those responses, but being aware of them and the student's reaction and not taking that personally, right? That if they're being aggressive, it might be to the material and content and not to you, right? Trying to build trust. And how do you do that? By being transparent with your grading and your syllabus, right? Abiding by your syllabus. I see my syllabus as a contract with the students, right? And I do everything that's there, but being able to pivot, right? I might have planned today that we're going to watch a video and we're going to do this lecture, and the video evokes emotion and now I can't get to lecture. I need to be able to pivot to take care of myself and the students that are present, right? Sometimes using a rubric, is helpful because it's, again, that understand transparency in grading. Providing a holistic approach, you can do this by providing supportive environments for students, providing resources right in your syllabus, and we're going to share some of that with you, right? So if a person is homeless and or suffering domestic violence, that they don't have that shame of coming and asking for resources. It's right in your syllabus for anybody to use, right? Creating safe and brave spaces, again, by predicting and preparing for subjects that are going to be discussed. I always advise students that that we may cover material that might be difficult for them. We even did that in the beginning of this training, and invite them to take care of themselves, right? But I'll tell them, hey, this video is 5 minutes, please take care of yourself and come back and join us, right? That invitation is not just, hey, go home and forget about class today. So you're setting up your expectations, but you are still allowing for folks to take care of themselves, right? Students can't learn unless they feel safe. So when it comes to students' trauma, there's much that needs to be tended to, right? So right now, when we come back into these spaces, it might be a quick review of safety and where the exit is and what our strategy is should something happen, right? Given that there's so much violence happening now. Respect for all. I provide rules for discussion. Leslie and I talked about, some of the discussions that we hold in class, right? Holding that everyone accountable to respect each other, right? So I give those rules right in the syllabus, right at the beginning of class, that we're going to have discussion and that we expect people to respect each other. And how I mirror that to them is that I tell them to make I statements. I feel that. I think that. They're a lot safer when entering into discussion, as opposed to you statements, right? Because you're owning what you're feeling, and recognizing that everybody might not feel that way. I bring in videos on subject relatable. So I bring in videos that, have shared lived experiences, both with race and gender, social status, and victimization. In terms of social action, I invite guest speakers and again have students submit questions in advance to guide the conversation, right? I'd hate to have a whole panel of people come and then nothing is said or nothing is asked, right? So I ask students to prepare for our guest speakers that are coming. And I set rules of mutual respect. I tell all of the people that are coming in, I expect you to respect my students. And then I tell my students, I expect you to respect the people. And what I mean by that, again, are those I statements, and ownership of that stuff. Not saying that we don't have difficult conversations, but we enter it into a space that's brave and safe for all, right? And then provide affirmations. Sometimes as professors, we get stuck on grading a paper and it looks so red that you can't even figure out what they did good. So I try to highlight the good stuff. And even in my rubric, I'm not an English teacher. So that's only worth 10% of their grade. I'm looking at the content, what they bring to the table, their shared and lived experiences and everything that we talk about, and less concerned about the grammar and things of that nature, because that's what they'll do in their English class, right? So setting up those brave and safe environments can help to make sure that we are being trauma informed, and the ability, more importantly, to pivot, right? When things don't go as planned. I used to be really rigid and really, I am an A-type personality. So sometimes recognizing that bias, as we learned in our opening, and knowing that I need to check that to make sure that I'm creating those safe and brave spaces.
And we, recognize that we're coming from the social sciences department of our college, and not all of you are teaching the type of work that we are. But if you are teaching English, being thoughtful to what the writing assignments are, and I know that you got to grade them on grammar, but give them credit for the expression of their opinions. I know, you might be teaching in math. There's still ways to incorporate safety, the rubrics, letting our students know what they're going to be graded on, how they're going to be graded on, even just getting back to students right away and not making them wait. It is very difficult for many of our students. And I've had these conversations with students, and I honestly even had this conversation with a relative of mine when I asked, you didn't submit a paper, you just didn't. And his response is, I was so stressed out thinking about it, and I didn't submit it. As soon as I made the decision to not submit it, the stressor went away. And so recognizing that's that fight, flight, freeze reaction. And so that's where your students are coming in from. So understanding that they're not getting an assignment to you is not anything necessarily that you did either. You've done your due diligence, try to reach out to them. Hopefully you're doing that from a compassionate and trauma-informed place, but recognizing that that may be just where they are. And as we're transitioning a little bit in thought, and again, I know we packed in a whole lot and we're coming up to the last few minutes of our time together, I didn't want us to leave without acknowledging that, the traumatic experiences and the conversations that can happen in our classrooms, and I'm telling you, I've talked to professors in other courses, not just in the criminal justice field, but in math and in nursing and in English, and in anthropology and poli-science, who've talked about the stuff that comes into the classrooms and hearing about the stress and the trauma that and traumatic experiences that students are experiencing. Prior to beginning my teaching career, I shared, I spent many years even already working with survivors of abuse and violence, and I'm sitting in court and I'm hearing the stories that they recounted, their terrible things that happened to them. And so I had the opportunity to start teaching in 2009. I was like, great. This is a great opportunity to continue to use the knowledge I have, but to get a bit away from the direct services, right? To shift from living in the trauma. And then, boy, was I mistaken. Because what I realized was the trauma doesn't go away. It doesn't stop at the door of our classrooms. The experiences, the negative experiences are still there, and they come into our classrooms in a different way. And so that's when I started realizing, okay, how do we deal with this in the classroom? And as Judy shared, those are just some of the things to think about when you're designing your classrooms, you're being in the classrooms, and what's my lesson plan, right? What book am I using? How many tests am I going to do? What are the writing assignments? All of those things are what we're focused on looking at, but we can look at them in a different way. It is difficult hearing those trauma stories. We can absorb that, and we call it that indirect exposure to trauma. It can be really absorbing those stories and being empathetic, and that engagement that we have with traumatized people provides that exposure. And so for teachers, for educators like us who are directly exposed to the large number of young people and youth and adults who are experiencing trauma, it's really a secondary type of trauma that we call vicarious trauma. So it's a big risk for us. It's the cost of caring. We hear it and call it that. Being a teacher is stressful enough, right? It could be lots of other things that we have to think about, but we're also responsible. I feel responsible for making sure they succeed. I'm not just delivering. I want to make sure they succeed in my classrooms. And then bring into the fact that we have students who disclose homelessness or food insecurity or abuse or violence or all those things. We can be advisors. We can be advocates in some ways. We become caseworkers at times. Students might share about their lives and their needs of their families, and that can become that secondary trauma. So I just want to point out a couple things for you to keep in mind. Frequent symptoms and signs of burnout. You have this in the PowerPoint. I did put the link to the PowerPoint, so I'm not going to go over this. There is a QR code here for the Compassion Fatigue Workbook that provides some, a checklist, symptom checklist, understanding of warning signs, identifying those cues for yourself as well, and some solutions, professional, personal. So wanted to share that with you. And again, it's in the link, and I'll pop the link in again before we leave, just in case you came in late.
So those are some local resources, and again, Leslie said we will make this PowerPoint presentation available to you. So some of the local victim service agencies, and then on the next slide, you'll see a QR code for those student resources at Bucks County Community College. So those will be helpful either to you yourself and or your students.
Sorry about that. I was trying to pop it back in the chat. So this is, again, just our contact information, the links to our LinkedIn. If you want to link back up with us, you have questions for us, there's any other resources we could provide. There's an article that is linked on my LinkedIn that talks about, that I co-authored about indirect victims of trauma. And it is actually a personal perspective of some trauma experience in my life as a family member of someone who experienced direct trauma. And so I share that with you as a resource. We have a couple minutes left, so we're happy to take any questions. We were trying to get through a lot of information and give you the opportunity to ask any questions. So I'm going to stop sharing, and we welcome you even to unmute yourselves if you want to chat.
My name is Millicent. How are you?
Good.
Well, how are you?
One of the things that I've been really trying to focus on is the trauma-informed teaching practices. And one of the helpful things that I found over the semesters is to, instead of just the introduction post, which is a public discussion for the students to help engage them, but also sending a getting to know you survey directly to them that is only going to come back to myself. So it's more of a private forum versus just sending them an email, and kind of opening up the platform, open-ended questions to let them express what they come to the classroom with. So their learning styles, their educational experience, but also their personal and professional experiences that they think affects their learning. And I was surprised the first time I used it, some of the students did express their personal traumas that they came with, that they know or unknowingly mention affects their learning. So it was an individual practice.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that, first of all. And second of all, thank you for doing that. I think one of the things that that I know and I've learned over the years in victim services, working in the field, people don't ask, what happened to you? What's been your experiences? And taking a moment to ask that can be really meaningful. Not everybody will feel comfortable right away, but it's a meaningful experience to know that your professor's asking, what happened to you and what do I need to know about you to work that into making sure you get what you need out of this course. So that's awesome. I love that idea. Right. So we are at 11:05, and I think that's our end time. So I think that was a wonderful way to wrap up the conversation. Again, we know that was a lot of stuff we were throwing at you. We didn't have a lot of time. If there's more information that we can provide, I'm happy to have a chat at any time. Please don't hesitate to reach out, and I'm grateful for all of you coming to share the space with us. Take care, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Millicent, can I get that information you were sharing? This is Barbara Pearl.
Sure, Barbara. I'll send you an email. Are you at Bucks?
I'm at Bucks and CCP. Yeah, I was just going to send you my email. I just would like to learn more about what you're doing.
Okay, great.
I just put it in the chat. Yeah, sorry, everyone. I just wanted to reach out.
Oh.
I'd like to learn more about the resource you're using, Millicent. And speakers, thank you so much. This was so informative and being so sensitive. Thank you. Really appreciate it. You said there's a link to your PowerPoint where, and I'm so sorry if I recorded this out of my, I don't know how.
No, it's fine. It's in the chat. Yeah.
It's in the chat? The link
Here,
PowerPoint. Okay.
I'll pop it in one more time because it'll be the last thing that pops up in your screen. Yeah.
Well, there's a way to download chats, and I did that. So
okay.
Hopefully it'll be there.
Yeah, because if you click on the link, then you should be able to.
And Leslie, if I don't have it for some reason, I took your email address.
But yeah, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you so much. Thank you for
Thanks,
doing
everyone.
like this. It's critical. Yeah. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Bye. And
all right. Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.